everyone. We're getting to try Old Ale. Welcome to another episode of The Beer Enthusiasts. This is episode 31. As we said at the end, this is quite the gem that Chris got us. He ordered it from somewhere that somehow ships to California and has Theakston Old Peculier, which is a classic example in the BJCP of Old Ale. And we were talking a little bit before we hit record, and we were both just like, we literally have no idea what to expect from even the color. We just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, forget even flavor or aroma. I don't know how this beer is going to come out of the can, to be honest with you. But it's just returned to the U.S. after at least 10 years hiatus. So if either of us have had it before, it's been too long ago that we have no memory of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this is definitely the first time I've had it. There's no doubt about that.
Look at that. I'm using my little Firestone Walker Nonic
Yeah,
pint,
me too.
or half pint, too. I suppose. It's good tasting glass.
Right.
But keeping a little English on the glassware.
Yeah. Well, walk us through this a little bit. Chris, tell us about a category that's kind of on the broader side. There seems to be a lot of, you can do this, you can do that, with Old Ale.
What's extremely interesting, well, first of all, BJCP, if you just read the entry in BJCP for Old Ale, you'll notice that the parameters are quite wide. So, and the most obvious one that's just totally boggles my mind is the ABV can range from 5.5 to 9% alcohol. And that's a lot of range for one style of beer, which is a pretty good hint that there's no overarching theme to the style, really. And the BJCP admits that it overlaps with several other styles, and it's sort of hard to define. And then on top of all of that, this particular example is unique for Old Ale. It's not like a lot of other Old Ales. So some of the things that you know and love about some other Old Ales or barley wines may not apply to this beer. We'll find out. I would imagine at 5.6%, maybe more doesn't apply than does apply. We'll find out as we get into sensory. But Old Ale, as described by BJCP, should sort of fall into that Venn diagram of British strong ale and barley wine. It could kind of be in the middle of that with some overlap. So it'll share a lot of malty, crystal malt style characteristics. And it should kind of lean toward the malt, but could be balanced with just a little bit of hop bitterness. Lots of fermentation character is appropriate, starting with your palm fruit esters, and your apple, all the way up to a smidge diacetyl might be okay in traditional English styles. We'll figure out if this one has it or not. The unifying theme that the BJCP gives, which I think is kind of funny, is that really the tiebreaker for determining whether something's like a British strong ale or an Old Ale, for example, is it should always exhibit some type of aged characteristic. And in parentheses, it gives examples, and some of the traditional ones of, like some aged malt character gives you this kind of leathery thing, maybe some dark and dried fruit. But then it goes through great pains to say that, you shouldn't have off flavors in the beer just for the sake of having off flavors, that it should be a character of aging. Now, the reason that that's weird to me is because I don't believe this beer is aged or meant to be aged or having aged at the brewery for a particular amount of time before releasing. I think it's just one thing to note that's important is the brewery does not refer to this as an Old Ale. So how it ended up here, I don't know. We're going to taste it and smell it and find out.
Yeah.
But I would imagine, my guess, which we'll confirm, is that we might be dealing with what you or I know more as British strong ale. Something a little bit closer to, Sam Smith Winter Welcome kind of beer, a slightly elevated example of strong bitter. But I will say from the outset, as we're kind of start looking at this beer, it's noticeably darker than most of those, right? British strong ale
Absolutely.
Is
Yep.
is paler than this. It's not super pale, but this is verging on the lighting. If you're watching, doesn't do it justice. It looks sort of brown. Really, in the lighting, it's kind of this crimson meets brilliant uh, rust orange type of character.
Yeah.
Um, and it is my beer poured quite clear. Difficult to
Mine as
see
well.
again just because of the color of it, but I can see through it.
Me too.
The foam is kind of this khaki color, a very light khaki color, and it receded pretty quickly. And when I was pouring it out of the glass or out of the can, it appeared to not have like a ton of carbonation. It's not flat by any means, but it poured with loose bubbles
Yeah.
um, and that sort of thing. So why don't you take us into the first bits of aroma?
All right. First bits of aroma. Definitely some fruity esters here. There's a little bit of, I would say, just kind of like almost perfectly ripe, kind of like a darker cherry. I don't know if it's a full on black cherry, but kind of like a dark cherry note. There's a touch of like a butterscotch, like a dried butterscotch note, maybe a little bit of diacetyl, which in low levels is definitely okay for the style, per BJCP. There's a little bit of that kind of green banana isoamyl acetate, kind of thing, kind of banana peel. Uh, so that's what I'm getting kind of from the fruity ester part of it, maybe yeast character, and then I mean, it's interesting when you look at the color of this thing, you're thinking this is just going to kind of be like screaming like, caramel or brown sugar or, toffee, on the nose, but it's really lots of heavily toasted, kind of brown bread. Like almost kind of like that
Absolutely.
dark, like oated, bread that you get at, Outback Steakhouse for free that they just bring out on the cutting board with, a couple of things of butter. So that was a little surprising at first. That was a little again, my brain was kind of expecting something, and I had this impression of what was coming at and also, I mean, last week we did a beer that was even lighter than this, and I would say that Scottish export we did decidedly more malt forward than this beer.
Yeah, absolutely. This one has a little bit more balance to it. I did cheat a little bit when I looked up kind of the on the website. They say it's brewed with pale and crystal malts and also a little bit of roasted barley, which kind of borrows an Irish red style trick, right? It doesn't taste acrid or anything like that. You can use roasted barley just for color adjustment, for foam retention, all manner of things. But I think in this situation, it bends what would otherwise feel like those particularly sweet impression caramels and toffees and stuff
Mm-hmm.
to exactly what you said: brown breads, toasted bread crust. Um, it's not as richly toasty as like German Dunkel or Doppelbock
Mm-hmm.
style malt character, but it is like a um, lighter, not in color, just in heft,
Yeah.
toasted bread character. Yeah, almost like a raisin bran. So you get that
That's a good one.
toasted bran muffin type character plus a little bit of fruit
Yeah.
character.
And the brand's got that kind of like toasted oat, kind of thing too, when you're getting into
Yeah,
kind of like that
yeah.
raisin bran thing. So I like that. I like that note. The palate I mean, is a different. It's a different experience for me. Because again, much like last week, there's this little. It's stronger than last week. There's this little thread of this kind of like really a lot brighter of a mint character. I think the one we were getting last week was a little bit more on the damp side. Maybe even if it's been exposed to a little bit of heat of some kind, but this is brighter. This is fresher. This is the kind of mint you're just kind of slapping to put into a mojito, and then to me it just pops in the finish. All of a sudden you get
Yeah.
this little bit of bitterness. And the other thing I think that's interesting too is that I think the bitterness is to me is a little bit more perceivable than I would have expected, but I think it's because of what I'm now confirming is relatively low carbonation. This is
Hmm.
finishing like very smooth, not a lot of carbonic bite to it, but it's letting that little bit of residual bitterness that's there, kind of say like, hey, I'm here. And this is a style that can be, relatively high in the, we've talked before about how IBUs don't really matter all that much, but, this is something that can be in the 40, 50, 60, IBUs, which even with, something that could be a little more malt or ester forward, would at least be something that would present itself in the, in the tasting experience. Not that it would be dominant by any means, but
Yeah, I'm surprised at how bitter it is. It's we're not in the realm of, an IPA or anything, but I just mean balanced against my expectations. It's got a nice,
yes,
firm, kind
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah.
it's definitely minty, like you said, also a little woodsy, kind of reminds me of cherry stem, which could just be confusion with that cherry character that we're getting
Mm-hmm.
to. But, you bite a little bit of the cherry stem and it's kind of like fruity and astringent. Um, that's that's about how I would describe it. And yeah, really noticing the lack of carbonation. It's a very fine, tiny bit of carbonation, and mine was a little bit cold too cold when I started, and even the can says
Mm.
to serve cool. So I would imagine they're thinking cask ale type temperatures,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in the
Yeah,
neighborhood of 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even maybe a little bit warmer in some situations. But all that to say, I didn't notice the diacetyl as much on the aroma, and I definitely notice it now
mm.
as I go in. And it's not off putting. It does seem like well integrated, right? It just gives this suggestion
Yeah,
of toffee, a little bit of butteriness, kind of like buttered toast, um, lightly buttered toast too, not just wrecking it with butter. Um, so your mileage may vary if you're able to track down this beer for how much diacetyl you can stand or not stand, but it's definitely there.
absolutely. Yeah, and again, the finish not overtly, definitely not dry, definitely not sweet. Just that little hint of bitterness that doesn't linger, gives a little balance. There's just a whisper of that thing like you've talked about in O'Hara's Irish Red. There's just that little hint of dryness that comes from the roasted barley that they've added, but overall a relatively smooth finish with not much of a linger to it.
Yeah, I gotta say, having this for the first time, or the first time that I can remember, I'm not sure if I was served this blind if I would have guessed old ale. I might have even thought it was Scottish export. It's just a little bit darker. It's not high enough alcohol to trigger old ale or barley wine in my mind. But
Yeah,
this is a richer beer than your standard ordinary bitters. We're talking about a beer drinking culture that'll drink 3.5% bitters and milds, pint after pint after pint, and this is
right.
closing in on doubling the strength of some of those. So even though 5.6% might not seem strong to you or I for your everyday American beer drinking, this is actually quite strong for an English ale in many respects. So I don't want to diminish it by saying it's lighter than some other examples of beer, because that's not the point. My point is just this is very atypical. I mean, I think I would have been in. I can taste the English and kind of Scottish
Yeah,
characteristics. So yeah, this to me situates almost like a cross between British strong ale and Irish red ale, um,
yeah.
on, to my palate, and so that's kind of a fun thing. Give me something I didn't really expect.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I was gonna kind of go down my own rabbit hole, but it's pretty much the same thing. I agree. I think I would think that with the esters, I would have found myself in English territory, and maybe with the color, you can kind of assume some things about whether it's going to be best, that it's not maybe best bitter, and you could maybe rule out strong bitter bin. But it's got that mint thing too, so I see it in the diacetyl, so like it can draw you to either there or to Scotch beers. It's not overly intense either, so you could think it's maybe an Irish red that you haven't had before potentially. Because I mean, this is what O'Hara's Irish red looks like. I mean, it's pretty dark for the style. So I think you're pretty spot on with that.
Well, I did not. come to the table with particular food pairing ideas. I wanted to use this as a practice to try to come up with something on the fly because I never had this beer, and I
Mm.
didn't want to, and now that I'm in more British strong ale type territory, that's opening up a lot of possibilities for me. I have some ideas there, but I think I want to. Well, I want to link this to a really funny thing to me, and we talked about this recently in a different context. The website has a couple of food pairing ideas for this beer,
Mm.
and it's like Yorkshire pudding and roast beef, and some other things. But one of the subheadings says, um, what does it say? I think it says soups and no casseroles and stews. And we had this joke the other day in our study group about pairing thing like a pairing idea being sandwiches,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, what kind of
Yeah.
casserole, what kind of stew?
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of joke that
So
there's foods and there's categories of foods.
yeah. And so maybe this is just my intense desire to clarify what they mean by stew, but I'm thinking this would
Mm.
be good with a like a Moroccan stew. So usually they're pretty vegetarian. They often have chickpeas. You can use butternut squash or even eggplant as a base. I think I would go eggplant. I think there's some interesting things with that kind of earthy sweetness of that purple eggplant skin that would go really well with this beer. Um, the Moroccan spice mix or ras al hanout is kind of it's built around cinnamon, ginger, cumin, some paprika. There is a pinch of cayenne in most versions, but it's not like, gives you a little zing. It's not super duper spicy or anything in terms of capsaicin. And some versions of that stew, they'll even put some fruit in it, like black currant
Mm.
or even like a little bit of raisin type thing, almost like rehydrate a fruit in there. So you've got this mix of spicy, a little bit fruity, um, kind of sweet and spicy and salty stew. And I think that would be nice here. Obviously, that mint character and woodsy character that we're getting in the hops is going to complement a range of those spices. The spice part of the mixture that's more ginger and kind of some of these nasally, brighter spices are going to create a little bit of tension and kind of break that tie between that, like toasted cumin and toasted bread characters that you're getting from the food and then from the dish. Um, yeah, it's got a nice amount of bitterness. As I sit here, way after the linger, the bitterness doesn't linger at all to me. It kind
Mm.
of washes away pretty nicely. So, um, while the bitterness is firmer than I anticipated, it's not so firm that you're going to run into very many clashes with the bitterness. I don't think. Um, but yeah, that kind of the earthy sweetness of eggplant, that kind of lightly nuttiness of chickpea, playing against the nuttier and kind of caramelier and toastier versions of the malt. Yeah, I think I'm gonna optionally add that black currant. I think black currant would be a really good complement to that dark cherry note that we're getting a little bit. Also provide little pop of acidity, which is missing in both contexts here. So yeah, let's go Moroccan stew. But I think, um, man, I think this is going to be good with a bunch of different stuff. What do you have in mind?
So mine is interesting because I kind of when I run into these situations where I've never had the beer when we've done this before, whereas you decided to go right off the cuff, I kind of like to pick something and then see if there's a way that I can take something that, because this is a very Cicerone thing to do, like you have this pairing going on and something's not working, so how are you going to change it? So another great way to, if you're studying for exams like that, that's always a good activity to, practice in. And I started with adobo chicken, kind of thinking this was going to be a little bit more like malt rich and caramely, and maybe have some fruity esters. I was thinking that was going to be more of the, kind of more of the complement was going to be that, but it's a little bit more in the toasted bread realm. It's a little bit more ester forward, where I think there's going to be a really nice kind of brightening contrast that happens more than I probably thought before. I didn't think there was going to be this kind of like fruit ester character. I mean, actually, quite complex for again for something for the style. Even though it's very clearly in the BJCP, I just think when you talk about Old Ale, it's just not something that people automatically think is like, oh yeah, that's it's not like German Weissbier where you're like, oh yeah, like tons of esters, right? Like Old Ale, that's the first thing that pops into mind. But when you've got something that's that when that's this soy sauce based garlic, you're probably using some brown on diced onion, brown sugar, black pepper, all those kinds of things for and then the soy sauce based marinade, all the bay leaves that you're going to be throwing in there. You're just going to be getting this really really deep savory dish. And I'm glad that I didn't go with because I think the thing that kind of saves me here is that it is chicken. And so it's really the meat is going to be it's going to be good, but it's not going to have kind of bring a ton of its own real powerful flavors to the to the party, like maybe a heartier steak or a fillet might have, where I think maybe you're getting into the realm where it's like, well, this kind of isn't kind of isn't standing up to it as much. So I think the fact that it's chicken I want to stick with. And I think there's going to be a really good contrast there. That's not kind of I don't really see it. When I think of contrast, I've been thinking a lot about contrast and kind of parsing out some different kinds of contrast. There's kind of this contrast that you can get from tastes like sweetness and bitterness, and to me, that's kind of this tug of war. And the goal is to make sure that no side decidedly wins. You're just really wanting them to kind of pull back and forth, but there's never one decided winner, because then I feel like that's when the pairing kind of falls off the cliff a little bit, or as in many tug of wars, someone falls into a giant pit of mud or something like that.
Yeah.
And then there's contrast where there's this depth of savoriness, and then there's this brightness of fruity esters or phenolics, which I'm so happy that the mint character is there in a strong way to kind of help with these fruity esters, because they're not while complex. Not fruity esters that are as strong as something like a Belgian dark strong ale by any means, but still enough to play a little bit in the pairing along with that hop character, and almost acting like like a piano that you're not just going to play all the deep notes. You have high notes in when you're playing the piano too, and so having a little bit of both of those in there brings some it's tense between the two, but when they're together they kind of balance each other. And so that's how I've kind of been thinking about the contrast of savory and then bright spices or fruits. And I think that the marinade is going to be perfect, and that salt character is going to give a boosted perception to the malt character. So even then, even if you were if you were thinking the malt was going to kind of cower and be kind of overpowered in the pairing, some sort of salt forward savoriness like soy sauce is going to probably come and save the day a little bit. And the other thing too that you were mentioning at the beginning that I think it really really relates to food pairing, especially when you were talking about the ABV range kind of being in the 5.5 to 9 range. This is one of those interesting scenarios where there's a very significant overlap in a part of the ABV range where things actually change when you're thinking about food pairing. If you're talking about the ABV range is 9 to 14. A lot of the things you consider about how alcohol is going to play in there, it's going to be pretty much the same. You're gonna be able to predict that. But when something ranges from 5.5, where there's no alcohol character like what we're perceiving, to 9%, where there's probably going to be a hefty amount, it changes what you can do. It changes how you can play with bitterness. This you can actually play with something like capsaicin and all these spices that you're talking about in your dish. I really liked that. I really liked that part of your dish that I think this could maybe use a little bit more of, with something like adobo, something else to kind of brighten it up a little bit, some sort of spice to throw in there. Because again, you're just working with these esters that are almost these familiar things, and then you're even getting like this almost like German wheat beer kind of impression when you're getting these spices with these esters. And So I love the route that your pairing went, and I'm actually relative. I wouldn't change a whole lot with mine. I'm relatively happy with where it landed, but not for the reasons that I thought.
I love that thinking too. Yeah, there's if you're progressing in the Cicerone program in particular, you might not be presented with a situation where the food and beer pairing works, and they might ask you to change something about it. And so that's a good study tip. Go in with an idea, but be flexible enough to change based on what's presented to you. And something a really big sense memory just came back to me that with a flavor note on this beer. And I think it's partially a mind trick with the lower carbonation, but the flavor is there. My mom used to make sun tea all the time. Um, and it's got this like oversteeped sun tea character to it. Um, that is
Spot on.
very, maybe it's lightly sweetened, because you don't want to be a monster and just drink, oversteeped sun tea that's just tannic as all get out. But it took me back to that. That's been, 30 years since I've had that. And I was like, man, this smells and tastes like my mom's sun tea in some respects. So, and I think that like black tea type quality is a really good. I think that would be awesome with adobo seasoning. It kind of lends almost the like in combination with the Esther character, lends kind of like a sweet tobacco leaf kind of
Mm-hmm.
note.
Yeah.
It's a really good complement to any Maillard browning that you're going to get on a relatively neutral protein like chicken. So that sounds yummy. And for my dish, that tea character is going to integrate with that spice mix pretty darn well, I think. And you said the other thing that triggered that memory for me is you said bay leaf, which also just has kind of like an herbal tea like quality to it. And yeah, so as an aside, it's not really an aside because we're still drinking the beer, but yeah, sun tea was a note that came
I
to me.
totally agree. So what did you come up with for dessert? Or are you doing dessert on the fly too?
Yeah, well, I thought about some ideas for what I think of as old ale that I don't know if they would really work because they even recommend things like, barley wine style things that you think of like bread pudding and sticky toffee pudding and all these things. And I don't know for me if this beer is big enough to deal with that. So
Hmm.
I've been waiting for this moment, and maybe I'm forcing the issue, but I wanted to pair a beer in these episodes with red bean bun.
Oh
They're
yeah.
like, they're different cultures all around Asia have kind of different versions and different names for it. But the idea is you take a lightly sweet adzuki bean paste. It's kind of a red bean paste, and you sweeten it up with a little bit of sugar. So it's kind of just got this really awesome earthy, creamy sweetness because you make the paste super creamy basically, um, and it's often enveloped in a very like lightly sweet white bread bun, essentially, and steamed is really nice too because it kind of like gelatinizes the bun. It makes the bun a little bit spongy, and then you've got that earthy sweet red bean paste in the middle. So I think red bean, that kind of earthy character that you get, is going to be a really nice pairing with that sun tea note that I just found, and the bun itself. Usually, I could be wrong about this. Folks can comment if I'm way off base here, but it's especially when they do the steamed bun. It's basically it's a very simple yeasted dough with a lot of baking powder to make it a little bit fluffier. And then when you steam it, it kind of hydrates it too. So it's fluffy and a little bit chewy, but it's just lightly sweet, and it doesn't have no browning characteristics. We're going to get all that
Mhm.
from the crystal malts and the roasted barley. It's just kind of lightly doughy, sweet, um, almost like sticky rice, even though it's not a rice bun. kind of situation. And so, yeah, you don't need a lot of carbonation, but the carbonation is low and the sweetness is low in the beer. And that dish is, you know, pretty mild on the sweetness with some uh, kind of earthy and bready aspects to it, and that seems like a pretty nice pairing to me. You've got the hop character that's whether you think it's minty or woodsy or um, you know, like black currant or whatever it might be. That's going to be a really nice complement to um, the earthier elements of that bean paste. It doesn't taste like super earthy like mushrooms or anything like that, especially when you're sweetening it up. But if you sweeten it with a little bit of brown sugar too to get that toasted sweetness quality to pair with the toasted character of the malts in here, and then the lightly sweet dough is just a, you know, we're guilty of overusing the word canvas, but I, you know, can't stop, won't stop. And I just think that layering on top of a lightly sweet, spongy, kind of hydrated, chewy dough character, this little bit of cherry, a little bit of banana, a little bit of um, apple, you know, that's going to be pretty nice.
Yeah, that sounds really. I think playing with, um, I think playing with earthier, um, kind of especially flavors from lots of different kinds of beans. I think folks need to do that a little bit more. I think there's some extremely interesting interactions that even to me I think are. I mean, they're strong enough and consistent enough for me that I mean to me they would get a bullet point or a section of on the syllabus and the common interactions because it just seems to be something that is there's just some reliable great interactions there, and so I love that unexplored, honestly, just downright unexplored in my opinion. I took a little bit of the way I kind of played it this one for two reasons. One, it's kind of playing if the beer kind of ends up the other way, where I was kind of thinking with the entree, that with the savory dish, that okay, if it's kind of like this then I'll like it, but then maybe it'll be okay. But this one was like, well, maybe if it's more like this then it'll be a little bit better. And I also made them today, so that's the other reason this is one where I think it could work, and then I'm going to try it right after this. And there's some interesting threads that are as we've been talking through this. But I made some strawberry crumble bars, so kind of like a streusel with like a streusel topping, cornstarch on the strawberries. You got to make sure that because remember, if you just bake strawberries, like you're just going to have the soggiest bottom of whatever you're making, because it's just there's so much water in them. But then you get kind of that buttery, it's flour, it's oats, it's sugar, and then it's just tons of melted butter. And so you're creating this streusel topping that again, you're getting into these like oats with brown bread, a compliment that I would have never, I don't think I've ever even uttered those words together as as a beer and food pairing compliment. But that's a familiar thing. Obviously, very lucky that there's going to be strawberry, banana. There's tons of fresh lemon zest you put on at the end. That's going to be a great thread with that, that sun tea. Kind of that,
man,
getting kind of that, like, I know,
yeah.
that's the thing. Yeah, lemon sun tea, where it's just like, maybe it's not the same. Maybe the zest is a little bit brighter, but, you prefer it to be maybe something that's more in like the bergamot territory to make it a true, lemon presence in tea, but still probably going to be super duper welcome in that regard. The buttery character from the streusel, a little bit of diacetyl in there. Would be remiss without saying that those are going to play together. Play together somehow, and then just the light kind of browning that you get on the top part of the streusel, and maybe even getting some interesting kind of brown butter character that kind of adds a little bit, adds some threads to it, but not making it super duper, because it's not a super duper sweet dessert either. Not a ton of sugar. There's plenty of butter in the batter, for the crust, and it's a softer crust. It's not something that's super dry that you would need to, kind of. It's not like a croissant, like trying to wash away a croissant with this. This beer's it's going to take you a few sips to wash that away. But this is a little bit more just softer texture. It's just going to you're not going to need as much carbonation, which again, just kind of fortunate and worked out. Had no idea that this was going to kind of be presented in this way in terms of carbonation. But yeah, I'm excited to after we sign off, I'll cut myself a square and I'll make sure to try it and see what happens.
Yeah, you'll have to comment and let us know because you leaned into the butter component and I leaned away from it, hoping maybe the diacetyl could provide some of the unctuousness and the pairing that's missing from a really buttery dessert or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But that's the whole game, right? Is we don't know until we try it whether the diacetyl is going to complement some butteriness in the dessert or whether it can act as a stand-in and tiebreaker if the dessert's not particularly buttery. You have all these theories about what's going to match up and what might not, and we've been surprised more often than not when we think something particular is going to happen, and then all of a sudden you're like, where did all this hop character come from? When you put these two things together.
Yeah, that's right.
Whatever it might be. It could be as simple as, I know I've mentioned in previous episodes, just how nutty rice tastes. Like, it's totally bland in most contexts to me, but when you pair it with a beer with some like amber or nutty characteristics, it's just like, this rice is the most flavorful rice on the planet, and it's just, it doesn't always work out like that. But yeah, that's a good illustration of like deciding to use diacetyl as a supplement or as kind of a pairing hook. And I'm kind of all acclimated to the diacetyl now. I'm not even really bothered about it.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Yeah.
Well, what a fun experience!
What a very fun one to get to try. Very, very thankful here.
Would love to try it on cask someday. That would be fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think in the past we've kind of had this is a couple of times in a row now where we're not really sure what we're doing, or another week where we're not really sure. We haven't decided what we're gonna do yet for the next episode because we're kind of trying to work through a lot of stuff through the BJCP and we're trying to find classic examples. So if we don't have anything in the mix, it was a little easier to plan out 3-4 weeks ahead when we just had the whole world was our oyster. But now we're being a little bit more patient and we're obvious, and I think I'm a little bit busier too, so it's harder to record every week. But I like where it's taken us so far because we're going down some pretty fun some pretty fun alleys here with some great styles and yeah, wow, what a unique beer.
Yeah, and if you have any ideas for styles for us to go, or particular beers too, sound off in the comments. We'd be interested to hear it. We do try to concentrate on BJCP listed commercial examples or, interesting new imported beers, that we haven't really gotten in a long time, or widely available examples of a beer, just so people can drink along with us. But yeah, we're getting a little bit more specific. It's crunch time for our studies, so no idea is too out of the box. Let us know.
That's true. Yeah.
Let us know what you think if you have a good idea for one to go over.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Well, I think that's a pretty good spot to end it. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great one. Take us out.
We are the beer enthusiasts. You've been watching our episode on Theakston Old Peculier. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. We dig all of the interaction that we can possibly get. Comment. Let us know what you agreed with, what you disagreed with. Help us on our journey in figuring out all of these many, many beers. We've been doing this for well over a year now. And are enjoying every second of it. So we really, really like when people can give us some feedback as well. Despite not being entirely sure about the next beer, we hope to see you on the next episode. Hang with us. We'll keep collaborating and getting some good ideas. And, cheers to Old Ale, if this is even Old Ale.
Cheers.